She is also recognized as a top 100 woman in Fintech.
There is now some hesitance to adopt the technology, specifically in the AI area, because there is no regulation.
On this episode of the Krista Code, we're exploring the future of financial services, from digital transformation and payments innovation to the real-world impact of generative AI and regulatory change. Joining us today is Krista Griggs, an industry leader who spent over 2 decades guiding banks, fintechs, and technology teams through complex transformation journeys. As head of banking, financial services, and insurance at Fujitsu UK, Krista had helped some of the world's largest financial institutions modernize legacy systems, embrace new technologies, and build cultures of innovation. And she's currently at GFT Technologies as a global account director. She is also recognized as a top 100 woman in fintech, a passionate advocate for diversity, and the driving force behind some of the most ambitious change programs in the industry. Krista, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
All right, let's start from the top. You've had quite a fascinating career across banking, tech, and consulting. What inspired you to shift into the fintech space, and what keeps you curious today?
I've always been really curious about how technology can shift the way that we experience things. I started my career working in a bank in the Netherlands, my native country, and I quickly became part of the team that built the first internet banking app. And this was before mobile apps, and it was a completely different way of doing things. And throughout my career, I've always been involved in how technology can shift what we do how we do things, how we interact with organizations, with governments. And so I think fintech is a really exciting space at the moment. I think there's so much change going on, so many opportunities, and I think it's really driving change in society for the good and the benefit of people. So I kind of liken technology to art in that it just creates new reflections back and new ways of even imagining how we do things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm really curious to learn from your experience. You worked both with legacy financial institutions and modern tech companies. From your experience, how do you bridge the gap between traditional banking and the digital innovation?
I think the interesting part is both have got some real value. There is tremendous strength in the trust that the legacy banks have got, in the recognition and the loyalty from consumers. But then at the same time, digital after the financial crash, neobanks, fintechs have come in and really changed perception of what's possible. And what we're now seeing is convergence of those two. There was a real diversification. Now we're seeing convergence of the two, and actually the ecosystem of the two working together and bringing that power and the information that the legacy banks have got, that real historic deep customer knowledge and intimacy, and combining that with new ways of doing things and new ways of thinking about things, is creating a whole plethora of new services that ultimately is for the good of society and the way that we do things and the way we want to consume services. So both have different struggles, and I always end up finding myself on the incision point where the two come together.
I think that's a nice place to be, nice point to be. What I find challenging is that throughout the innovation cycles, we always have to look back at compliance and regulatory challenges. How do you balance the needs from the business for the rapid innovation with actual realities of compliance and legacy systems, especially in banking?
It's an interesting challenge that they've been navigating. So I think in many ways, innovation regulates itself to some degree. We're seeing that with AI systems, for example, at the moment. There's a real drive and therefore an adoption of companies to put ethical, explainable, structures in place to have communities to communicate and connect and interact more proactively, in order to create an environment that's safe for everyone. Because if it's not safe, people simply won't use it. And for it to be successful, it needs to be safe. So we've seen, just recently, we've seen Sam Altman giving testimony in the US Senate about the need for regulation, because the point that we've hit at the moment with AI is a really good example. And there's lots of different technologies. So there's DLT that's changing perceptions and capabilities, quantum that's powering up some of the innovation in terms of the different ways of computing complex problems. But ultimately, what we're seeing now is having that sort of convergence of the innovation of the technology with those legacy banks who are trying to adopt that and, to some degree, keep up with the competitors who've taken a significant slice of the market space, but they also want to lead in those areas. And what we're seeing is that there is now some hesitance to adopt the technology, specifically in the AI area, because there is no regulation. So fine, it self-regulates a little bit, or actually quite significantly. And by having benchmarking measures and tools in the marketplace, we're seeing that they're constantly competing with each other, not just in terms of capability, but also in terms of safety. But there's a real reluctance in the large banks to adopt it. Not because they don't want it and they don't see the benefit, but they're worried. The leaders, business leaders in the bank, are worried about what regulations is coming down the line. And if they don't build it into the solutions now, then they're stuck with regulatory issues in the future. On the flip side of it, actually, the constant change in regulation is actually driving adoption in other areas. So we're working with some of the global banks implementing AI solutions in order to keep up with the fraud in the industry that's driven by the innovation, and actually being able to deliver faster to some of those compliance and regulatory pressures by using new technology in order to step away from having to do it manually, because they simply wouldn't be able to do it at the scale that they're currently doing.
I'd like to continue conversation about AI and what's happening with this technology in the context of financial services and banking. We've spoken a lot about AI on the previous episodes, and we keep stumbling upon different cases that sometimes are obvious, sometimes are not so obvious. Where do you see the most promising use cases for GenAI, and what are the main challenges for adoption?
So I think GenAI and agentic AI, which is sort of more taking shape now, are slightly different. So I think from a GenAI perspective, what we're seeing is it's very useful in consumer interaction because it's so driven by language. It means that it's a much more natural way of interacting. So whether that's chatbot services, it's being built into some of the apps, and it's creating, by and large, as long as it's controlled and managed and allowed to be escalated to live agents, human agents, it can be a much better service for the consumers. Similarly, in employee engagement, so it can help remove some of the mandrolic processes that are really repetitive and boring. And so that means that people can provide much more value in what they do because they can allow the AI to solve some of those things. And I guess finally, and in the more agentic AI side of things, is where we're seeing a lot of the development in the back office and the automation in the back office. And that can be in code development. So we're seeing across industries in many places layoffs where agentic AI is being used to generate code. But equally, again, I think there's also issues with that. I know there was a study quite recently in Carnegie Mellon where they created a virtual company and manned it solely with AI agents, and it was really inefficient and it was total chaos because they started working across each other, and because there wasn't that human interaction, it simply didn't work. And some of the things that we see in human processes and operations, some of those inefficiencies, we're creeping into that as well. So I think it's really interesting to see how it can augment, and it's where evolution of the solutions needs to come in order to actually drive continuous value, but measure, adjust, and be able to do that in a responsible way. And that's also the way that you can look at it from a compliance perspective, is making sure that you build in the right checkpoints and the human interaction, and to ensure that it remains on track to those objectives that ultimately as a company you still want to control.
Yeah, it's fascinating to be inside of that technology revolution in a sense, because like the example that you gave about the company powered by AI 100%, I would imagine that sometimes in the future, maybe 6 months, maybe a year from now, maybe even less, I don't know. It's all so fast that will be possible. I was reading some papers this morning, and I see there are more and more one-person unicorns that becomes a thing, where you have like crazy revenues generated per employee in the company. So we actually getting there, I think, but still, like you said, yes, it's more augmented. It's more like whoever learns how to leverage the technology in the best way and complements the fundamental human talents, I think wins the game today. But it's curious to see what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, and I think governments will change a lot of that as well, because we see both the regulation can actually be a driver for innovation, and the adoption of services. So we've seen open banking is a really good example, where HMRC have adopted that for payment in the UK for payment of taxes. There's now I think probably next year or a year after, they'll be doing that with paying out benefits from the government, and then you'll get more people using those kinds of services. But still, adoption is quite low because people are still quite hesitant to trust, ultimately.
Speaking about payments landscape, any trends or technologies that you're most excited about right now?
I think at the moment everything is converging. So if you look at the platform economy that happened in retail, probably more than anything, the ability to be able to interact, connect. I talked about the examples of the government connecting through the financial services, but it's also banks who are going to be able to deliver some sort of platform service to be able to support payments in a different way. Ultimately, people aren't looking to pay; they are looking to purchase something, and payment, whichever form it is going to be part of that process. And we're seeing a huge diversification, and have seen for probably the last 5 years or so, of the payment rails and the ways of paying. We've now seen, for example, that Google have just released Buy for Me as an AI service. And then what you then get into is what are the legal ramifications if there's any issues in that process, who's accountable if there wasn't a human in the loop. But it's those payment rails. So that's from a retail perspective. And I think the same will happen as we're seeing the global the shift in global politics and global economy. There's more and more need in commercial banking, for example, as well, for international trading, international payments. And that's where DLT and digital assets, stablecoins, for example, might be a completely different way of, again, releasing trapped value in the process, because the process itself can take days, sometimes weeks. And I think it's in some of those areas where actually the payment rails that we put in place in those environments can really innovate and support organizations who are traversing quite a difficult environment at the moment. And I think banks and payment providers and fintechs have got quite a significant role to play in understanding the pain points in those processes and trying to resolve them. So I think there's a lot to come still in terms of changes in those areas.
Yeah, I think the payments evolving quite rapidly, but it also driven by customer expectations. New generation expecting certain speed in terms of transactions and user experience in general. So let's take it one step further and talk about future of digital banking. How do you envision that?
I think it's a really good question. I think it's really difficult to imagine what's going to happen because ultimately consumers don't set out to use a financial service. They're not looking for a product from a bank. They're looking to buy a house and therefore they need a mortgage, or they want to start a company, or they want to grow their company and they need a loan. They're looking for protection either through longevity and pensions or through insurance. And so none of that is related to how they actually, to the actual financial product that they want. It's just a channel and a way to achieve an outcome. And we're seeing that with the retail space. We've seen that first. Subsequently, as I say, we're seeing it in wealth now. So with the great wealth transfer, we're seeing wealth transfer to younger generations that are expecting to interact very differently, who want to diversify in the kind of assets they want to potentially invest their wealth into. So again, you mentioned it's all driven by consumer experience. And ultimately, that's going to drive what's possible. But if you think back just 3 years ago when ChatGPT first came out and it couldn't even search the internet, and where we've come now, I think the future that those types of technology are making possible. I talked about quantum, and actually some of the things that were physically just impossible because the compute power wasn't there to enable the processing of data in a way that was providing the right information at a timely manner and a trusted manner. And I think some of those things are going to move so quickly, and it's a big flywheel that's running at the moment. And it depends a little bit on how those levers fall, in which order they happen, how some of the global economies, regulators respond to that. So, for example, in the APAC region, we see a lot more innovation because the regulator is a lot more flexible and open. Europe traditionally is quite hesitant and conservative, and that's all going to sort of change a little bit how those dynamics play out. So I think it's, as I said, hugely exciting time to see where that combination of innovations and that convergence is going to take us. I think it's going to be beyond our imagination right now, certainly.
Yeah, I like the concept of flywheel that you brought up, like innovation flywheel. And while it's sort of powered by consumer expectations, but at the same time, the real force that drives it is fintech, startups, neobanks, maybe conventional institutions that applying new technology. So all at the same time, we're having more increasing regulatory complexity in the UK, in European Union. How can you balance that innovation with that compliance in a scalable way?
It's a partnership. It has to work in a partnership. So it's important to understand the direction of compliance and some of the principal guardrails. And as I say, I think that's what currently what the industry is demanding is, where do you want us to go? Give us the hard lines, and then we can navigate the rest of it. Again, I think so having soft touch, light touch regulation in order to give direction, so that the self-regulation of the organization of the industry can continue evolving, that will help, because actually the traditional banks are also putting a significant amount of venture capital into fintechs that they can see are driving that innovation. So it's being aware of both. It's experimenting regularly to look for the outcomes, look for the potential pitfalls and the people that get left behind sometimes, but equally also looking at what's possible. It's really easy to be a doom thinker, and when you look at regulation, it's really easy to say no, stop. I remember, I think it's probably last year or 18 months ago when there was an open letter that said stop, we must stop. But the reality is you can't stop, because malicious actors aren't going to stop, other nation states aren't going to stop. So you have to continue to work together as a government, as a fintech industry, as the investors, and guide the development in the right direction, and just put enough checkpoints in saying, is this achieving the outcomes that we want? Is this good for people? Is it good for society? Is it good for business? and adjust as you go. And you can't do that by predicting it because the technology is just too complex to be able to, and moving so rapidly, you can't predict for that, you can't regulate for that, and certainly no government I know is fast enough to regulate to a level of detail that can be managed. So much like the internet was developed without any regulation, really, in an initial stages, you have to innovate and see where it takes you, and course correct frequently.
Krista, you've been recognized as a top 100 woman in fintech. What does this recognition mean to you, and how do you see the role of women evolving in the fintech sector?
I think it's fantastic. So I'm really pleased. I'm really excited for women in the industry at the moment. I think there are some phenomenal role models in the industry who are really moving it forward. And women hold at least 50% of the buying power. So it's really important they're part of how we put society together. So I feel empowered. I feel like I have a responsibility to pay it forward, to bring new talent along, and to encourage other women. I think there's some huge surge of fintechs, of founders, of really being proactive about funding female founders, because often they have a slightly different perspective, and they bring that perspective of what I think in some ways is quite an underserved part of society.
Yeah, congrats, by the way, on the
Thank you.
recognition. I'd like to touch a bit the cultural aspects of your experience. At Fujitsu, you led cross-functional teams across industries. What's your approach to cultivating innovation in such complex regulated space?
So I think there's a few things to that. In any organization, whether it's a small organization or a large organization, there's inertia. And I now work for a much smaller company. It's still a significant size, but still very much a startup culture. But wherever you go, I've worked in Lockheed Martin, in defense, Fujitsu, similar, GFT, and before that. And in order to create innovation, it's about setting a vision and making sure that you bring people on the journey. They understand what's in it for them, how they can achieve outcomes. It's taking away the fear for that, and finding the people who are prepared to gamble, to take a risk and try something new, and then with that create that momentum and create that really positive energy. I think that can come from innovation and succeeding. For me, I love new things. I love transformation. I get bored really easily. But it's finding the right people to bring them along, and then creating that space and that safe space for people to try to fail sometimes, and learn from that and move forward from that. So I think a lot of that is around psychological safety, around creating a vision and creating that positive momentum for people to be brave to step out of their comfort zone.
We talked about culture of innovation. We talked about women in tech. And my next question is about new fintech leaders, especially those who are just starting their careers. What advice would you give to these people?
So one is be curious and always continue to learn. There's so much changing so rapidly. I know there's a joke in AI that every week you have to relearn in order to be an expert in your field. But also look at where your curiosity interfaces or overlaps, intertwines with where there's value, and where people. I mean, this is to some degree Japanese ikigai. It's really understanding where you get passion from, and where you have value to add, and pursuing that, and not give up. Be brave, try, and not give up.
Quite inspiring. Krista, I'd like to wrap it up with interesting conceptual question. I've been thinking about this myself, and it's quite challenging, so bear with me. Mm-hmm. If you could redesign the financial services industry from scratch, what's one principle you would build it on?
For me, it would be distributed trust. So I think one of the things that's the biggest blocker is monopolies, and and lack of trust. I think trust is so essential. And again, talking back to the financial crash, that was one of the things that really disrupted trust, not just in financial institutions, but the whole society was affected by that, and for some time. And so the internet distributed access to information. And so I think that's ultimately where this comes to, is having some sort of network, of having democratized access to your own data, democratized access to different services, and real individualization of the services that we continue to develop for people's evolving needs. But at the same time protecting individuals' privacy and their autonomy and their agency. So I think distributed trust somehow has to be at the heart of that. And I think in some places we can see it's blocking innovation because it's really difficult to achieve.
I think the system that you describe resembles quite well with cryptocurrency and blockchain.
To some degree, I think cryptocurrency and blockchain has trust by default. I'm thinking more about zero trust platform. So there's definitely a DLT background behind it, but I think there is a huge amount of distrust in cryptocurrencies because of the anonymization and the lack of control. So I think some sort of middle ground whereby individuals have potentially more agency and there's less. There's more regulation of fraud, I guess.
Well, Krista, thank you very much for the time. It's been a great conversation. I had pleasure interviewing you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And for the listeners, thanks for listening to the end. And don't forget to hit the like button, leave a review at the podcast platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And see you in the next episode. Bye.